On the afternoon of February 3rd, 1998, in the small town of Cavalese, Italy, a United States Marine Corps EA-6B Prowler aircraft was flying at low altitude during a routine training exercise. In a tragic accident that quickly became ugly, a cable of a ski lift operated by the Cermis ski resort was severed, leading to a cable car carrying 20 passengers plummeting to the ground, resulting in the deaths of all on board. The incident became known as the 1998 Cavalese Cable Car Crash, 22 years after another crash involving a cable car occurred in the same area. The crash caused shock and grief worldwide, prompting investigations by both US and Italian authorities. The pilot and crew were accused of deviating from approved flight paths and altitude limits, leading to a diplomatic dispute between Italy and the US. The legal proceedings that followed lasted for years, culminating in the acquittal of the US servicemen of manslaughter charges by an Italian court in 1999. The incident highlighted the need for improved safety protocols and increased cooperation between military and civilian authorities during training exercises in populated areas. It also underscored the importance of adhering to international aviation regulations to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Background. The United States, as a NATO member, regularly conducted military training exercises in various European countries, including Italy. These exercises were aimed at maintaining military readiness and fostering interoperability among NATO forces. However, they often posed risks to civilian populations due to the proximity of training zones to inhabited areas. With heightened tensions stemming from the Balkans conflict and NATO's involvement in peacekeeping efforts in the region, US training exercises were of high importance and occurred frequently. Prior to the crash, there were concerns raised by local authorities and residents about the safety of military flights in the area, particularly the risk posed by low-altitude flights over densely populated areas. However, these concerns had not led to significant changes in military training procedures or flight routes. Military regulations demanded that the plane have a minimum flying height of 1,000 feet, with restrictions regarding maximum speed and what manoeuvres could be conducted also enforced. This was in response to a Prowler jet crash that occurred in Yuma, Aris, 2 years prior, killing all 4 crew members during a training exercise. But according to engineers belonging to the ski lift company that owned the cable cars, the plane must have been flying between 260 to 330 feet for it to have hit the cable, based on estimations regarding how high the cables were off the ground. Additionally, training flights within the Cavalese region were restricted to 2,000 feet, although an investigation board consisting of 6 US Marine Corps officers, 1 US Air Force officer, and 1 Italian Air Force officer found that ground supervisors failed to inform the crew about this. On the fateful day in early February 1998, it was precisely during one of these routine training exercises that the US military so often conducted in Italy that the incident occurred. Strage del Cermis. On the 3rd of February 1998, an EA-6B Prowler, CY02, callsign EZ01, electronic warfare aircraft belonging to Marine Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron 2 of the United States Marine Corps, was on a low-altitude training mission piloted by Captain Richard J. Ashby and his navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, with Captains Chandler P. Seagreaves and William L. Rainey also on board. According to some eyewitness accounts, the plane was travelling so low and fast that it barely managed to navigate past lakes, roads, houses, and even over vehicles upon crossing a busy roadway, frightening some villagers in the process. Just past the halfway mark of the training flight, the Prowler suddenly changed direction, veering left into the valleys. After the incident, this was discovered by investigators that, according to Italian government officials, was in violation of the agreed course and the area limits for this exercise. At around 3 p.m, Ashby saw the yellow cable car to his right and banked sharply left and up in an attempt to avoid a collision. Ultimately, it was too late, and at 15:13 local time, the right wing of the aircraft struck the cables supporting the aerial lift from Cavalese from underneath. It was flying at a speed of 470 knots and at an altitude of between 260 to 330 feet, in a narrow valley between mountains. With the cable severed, the cabin from Cermis, with 20 people on board, plunged over 80 metres, leaving no survivors. Among the 20 killed, 19 passengers and one operator, were 7 Germans, 5 Belgians, 3 Italians, 2 Poles, 2 Austrians, and 1 Dutch. The Prowler suffered severe damage to its right wing and tail, which caused fuel and hydraulic oil to leak. Nevertheless, the plane successfully made an emergency landing at Aviano Air Base. This was the second cable car disaster to have occurred in Cavalese, the other occurring in 1976 and taking 43 lives. US President Bill Clinton offered an official apology and promised monetary compensation. Thomas M. Foglietta, US Ambassador to Italy at the time, visited the crash site and knelt in prayer, offering apologies on behalf of the United States. In Italy, the low-level flight was strongly criticised, and some politicians called for a re-evaluation of rules, or a complete ban of such exercises, though low-level flight was already illegal. Then Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi claimed it was a terrible act, a flight practically scraping the ground. It received the now infamous name of Strage del Cermis. Trials. Italian prosecutors wanted the 4 Marines to stand trial in Italy, but an Italian court recognised that NATO treaties gave jurisdiction to US military courts. Initially, all 4 men on the plane were charged, but only the pilot, Captain Richard J. Ashby, and his navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, actually faced trial, charged with 20 counts of involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide. Ashby's trial took place at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. It was determined that the maps on board did not show the cables and that the EA-6B was flying somewhat faster and considerably lower than allowed by military regulations. The restrictions in effect at the time required a minimum flying height of 2,000 feet. Ashby said he thought that they were at 1,000 feet. The cable cut was at a height of 360 feet. Ashby further claimed that the altimeter on his plane had been malfunctioning and that he had been unaware of the speed restrictions. The independent board blamed the aircrew for aggressively manoeuvring their aircraft, while the prosecution deemed that the crew had also conducted an unorthodox roll manoeuvre that further contributed to the plane going off course. In March 1999, the jury acquitted Ashby, outraging the Italian public. The manslaughter charges against Schweitzer were then dropped. This was not the end of the case, however, and the things only got more tense and messy from here. Although initially acquitted, Ashby and Schweitzer were court-martialed a second time for obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, because they had destroyed a videotape recorded on the plane the day of the disaster. The existence and destruction of this videotape only came to the attention of military investigators in August of 1998. The other 2 members of the crew, Captains Chandler P. Seagraves and William L. Rainey, received testimonial immunity and elected to disclose the truth about everything. Ashby and Schweitzer were found guilty in May 1999. Both were dismissed from the service, and Ashby received a 6-month prison term. He was later released after 4.5 months for good behaviour. Schweitzer made a plea agreement that came to full light after the military jury deliberated upon sentencing. His agreement prevented him from serving any prison time, but it did not prevent him from receiving a dismissal. In their appeal, Ashby and Schweitzer asked for a re-examination of their trial and for clemency, challenging their dismissals in order to be eligible for military benefits. They claimed that during the first trial, the prosecution and the defence secretly agreed to drop the involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide charges, but to keep the obstruction of justice charge in order to satisfy the requests coming from Italy. The appeal of Schweitzer was denied in November 2007. Decisions from the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces were made available in August 2009. US report and reaction. In a formal investigation report redacted on the 10th of March 1998 and signed by Lieutenant General Peter Pace the US Marine Corps agreed with the results of the Italian officers. The document was kept secret until the Italian newspaper La Stampa legally obtained a copy from the US archives and published it on the 13th of July 2011. The Marine aircrew was determined to be flying too low and too fast, putting themselves and others at risk. The investigation team suggested that disciplinary measures against the flight crew and commanding officers should be taken, that the US had to bear the full blame for what happened, and that victims' relatives were entitled to receive a monetary settlement. The commission found that the squadron was deployed at Aviano on the 27th of August 1997, before the publication of new directives by the Italian government forbidding flight below 2,000 feet in Trentino, South Tyrol. All the squadron's pilots received a copy of the directive. A copy of the directive was later found unopened in the cockpit of the EA-6B, along with maps marking the cable car wire routes. Directives were irrelevant here, however, since diving below cables was prohibited at all times regardless. On the 2nd of February, Schweitzer planned the flight route for a low-altitude training mission using obsolete documents. However, it was proved that the squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Moog, and his assistants, Captain Royce, Rees, Watton, and Carmanian, did not alert the navigator about the new flight altitude limitations, with it subsequently being suggested disciplinary measures be taken against the commanders as well. Ashby was qualified for low-altitude flights and prohibited from diving below cables at all times. His last training mission of that kind was flown over 6 months before, on the 3rd of July. The report includes flight tracing from a nearby AWACS plane. The document reports a camcorder aboard the flight, but it was blank after Schweitzer had taken the original cassette and burned it afterwards. Schweitzer confessed in 2012 that he had burned the tape containing incriminating evidence upon returning to Aviano Air Base. By February 1999, the victims' families had received $65,000, equivalent to $121,000 in 2024, per victim, as immediate help by the Italian government. In May of 1999, the US Congress rejected a bill that would have set up a $40 million compensation fund for the victims. In December 1999, the Italian Parliament approved a monetary compensation plan for the families, $1.9 million per victim. NATO treaties obligated the US government to pay 75% of this compensation, which it did. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please give it a like. And for more amazing tales and thrilling stories, don't forget to subscribe to Uncovered Secrets. Also, hit the bell icon to stay notified for every release.